Hello, today we're going to talk about congruent triangles. Now, the first thing that we're going to talk about when we talk about congruent triangles is why are triangles congruent after certain transformations? It shouldn't say any, but after rigid motions. So why are they congruent after rigid motions? They're congruent because the distance between points and the angle measure between those points are preserved under rigid motions. So if the angle measure and the distance are preserved, the figure basically just moves across the grid. Nothing changes about it. It's just moving. So now we're going to figure out, how do we know if triangles are congruent when they're not in the coordinate plane? And the way that we're going to determine this is if their corresponding sides and corresponding angles are equal in measure. And there are 5 main ways, or only 5 ways, I should say, not main, to prove triangles congruent. And we're going to go through each example below. So the first way is called side, 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 and we abbreviate that with SSS for side, side, side. And that states that two triangles are congruent if all of their corresponding sides are congruent. So if this side and this side go together, this side corresponds with this side, and this side corresponds with this side, then the triangles are congruent. The next theorem is called side angle side. Side angle side says that two triangles are congruent if two corresponding sides and the angle between them are congruent. So here are my two corresponding sides that are congruent. That's one set of corresponding sides. Here's the other. And then see that the angle that's the angle that is equal is between those two corresponding sides. When I name this, I'm going to look and go either clockwise or counterclockwise. It doesn't matter which way I go, but I'm going to start at something on my shape. Here's a side. Directly next to that, I have an angle that's being labeled, and next to that, I have another side. So that's why it's side angle side. Another way to prove that triangles are congruent is called angle angle side. Now this says that two triangles are congruent if two corresponding angles and a non-included side are congruent. So here is one pair of corresponding angles. Here's another pair. And here is my non-included side, meaning it's not the side between them. So again, when I go around my figure, here's an angle that's being labeled, here's another angle, and here's a side. Now I can't go this direction because I have an angle here. If I go this way, I have to skip both a side and an angle. I can't skip. I have to go to the nearest congruent corresponding part, which in this case is the side, or is the angle in pink. All right, let's try this one. Angle side, angle side angle. For angle side angle, it says two triangles are congruent if two corresponding angles, corresponding angle, and the side between them are equal. And the last one says hypotenuse leg. So this one says two right triangles are congruent. So hypotenuse leg is only in right triangles because only right triangles have a hypotenuse. So they're congruent if the corresponding hypotenuse and one leg are equal. So here is my corresponding hypotenuse. Here is a leg. But notice that I still have a third piece of information here. That third piece of information that I need is that it's a right triangle. Now, when I go around and look at this, sometimes students will like to say this is an angle followed by a side, followed by a side. Angle, side, side. We do not abbreviate this angle, side, side. If it's a right triangle, it's hypotenuse leg. If it's not a right triangle, we do not know that the triangles are congruent. Another way that we do not know if two triangles are congruent is if we only know that the angles are congruent. We need to know at least one side is congruent to say that the angles are or the triangles are congruent. Sometimes, though, we will have to use prior knowledge to determine if the triangles are congruent. So looking at this diagram, I have some things that are already labeled as congruent for me. I have these corresponding angles, and I have these corresponding sides. But I don't know anything else. Except if you remember back, these angles here are actually congruent because vertical angles are congruent. So because vertical angles are congruent, we can now determine that these triangles are congruent. And the method that we're going to use, let's go around in a circle and see what, or clockwise or counterclockwise to determine which method. Starting at an angle here, I have an angle, followed by an angle, and then followed by a side. So it's angle, angle, side. Even if I look at my other triangle, an angle, a side. Again, I can't go in this direction because I would skip over a side and an angle. I can't do that. For this next one, we can also prove that these triangles are congruent because they share a side. This side here, we usually mark it with an X, is a shared side. And in geometry, we call that a reflexive side. And obviously, if it's being shared, we know that it's the same in both triangles, the same length, right? So now looking at these two triangles, I can see that the method that they share is side, 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 because all of the sides, corresponding sides, are equal. The last thing that we're going to do in today's lesson is talk about congruent statements. So first we're going to write a congruent statements for each of these following triangles. And we're going to put the corresponding vertices in the correct order to state the method that is used. So as you can see, I'm going to go through and I'm going to label using my colors that this side and this side go together. My other side with the two little congruent marks go together, and those right angles are equal. So when I look at these triangles, I can see that I have a yellow, immediately blue, then pink. Over here I have a yellow, blue, pink. So these are congruent. So now I'm going to put the corresponding sides in order. So if I name the first one C, D, E, I would go down to the yellow and then across to pink. And I'm going to do the same thing for the next one. I got to go down to yellow and across to pink, which means I have to start at F, go to G, and then over to H. That order is very important. And now I can state the method, and I kind of already did it before. I said that I had a side followed by an angle followed by a side. So this is side, angle, side. This next one, the triangles are not apart, so it's a little bit more difficult to see. But because they are stuck together, we have that reflexive side again. So that side is reflexive. And now I have 3 pieces of information in both my triangles. The way that I like to do this actually is to redraw my picture if they're stuck together. So here's M, L, and K. And then I'm going to draw the other one, I think right here below it, K, M, and J. And I'm going to remark all my stuff that I have marked in the original. Now you can color code if you want, but based on the congruent marks, I can already see that these triangles are congruent by side, angle, side. Because I have a side, 2 sides, and the angle in between them. Now to name the order of the letters, I can choose whichever order I want for my first triangle. I'm just going to go J, K, M. And for my second triangle, I have to do the same motion that I did for the first one. I have to go across the 1 hash mark to the angle, then to the X. So I'm going to go across the 1 hash mark to the angle, so L to M, then to the X, so K. All right, and that's it for today's lesson on congruent triangles.